All right, we are live. Welcome to
Pew, pew,
the
pew.
Fray community event. Now, tonight is a very exciting evening because we have a special guest, a special freelancer, Penn Murphy, who is going to talk to us today about one of the most underappreciated aspects of game design, or game development, which is, of course, game design itself. It is the invisible wall that binds everything together. It is what takes a good game to greatness. It's what keeps you coming back for the experience points, for that extra golden coin as Mario. And it is an absolute pleasure to have you here today to get into the nitty gritty about what makes great game design. So Penn is working on a super secret project for update 017. I cannot tell you what it is. She cannot tell you what it is. All I could say is that it's really, really cool. And you will eventually get to see it. We might have her back again once we reveal what she's working on. But hopefully, in the meantime, you can appreciate the work that she's putting into it. And who knows, maybe some of her game design will give you clues to what she's building. Uh, so, Penn, what can you tell us about yourself?
Ooh. Yep, my name is Pen, as said. Uh, I'm a game designer based in Melbourne, Australia, so sorry about the accent. I've been working in games for about 6 and a bit years now. I moved to Melbourne originally to study game design, and I'm very lucky that I got hired straight out of uni, which is the games industry in Australia is pretty different from elsewhere. Um, it's I'd like I think the games industry is competitive everywhere, but it's even more so I feel in Australia where we don't have very many studios. So a lot of work in Australia for game designers or games people, especially early career, is very much you have to do indie because there aren't companies that can hire you. So it's that or bust. But I'm very lucky. There are a couple of larger studios that do have presences in Australia at time to time. And I got hired straight out of uni at EA, where I was lucky enough to work on The Sims Freeplay for a few
Ooh,
years, as well as Real Racing Next,
ooh,
which is a really interesting and fun experience, the two of them. I also did an internship at Zero Latency, which is a free roam virtual reality studio, which does some really interesting things as well. Um, and yeah, after spending a few years at EA, I moved over to Ubisoft, where I worked on gameplay design. Specifically, the thing that I'm proud of from that one was leading the gameplay design for the Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon faction, which was really fun, and I'm really glad it managed to get released. The game was unfortunately sunset just a couple of nights ago. Rest in peace. That's games these days. But that's okay. Now I'm excited to, yeah, as you mentioned, be working on SCP stuff, and I'm very keen to see how people like it when it goes out.
a very funny comment from Ship McGree on YouTube says, "Does the Black Moon oi oi oi?" There is a great amount of Australian representation on 5K. I mean, we've got you, we've got Al Barney fighting off the sharks to keep his internet connection running, and do, doing his work on Tasmania, on the island of Tasmania, I believe. Kyle Fitzpatrick is
Yep,
down there
yep,
as well. So,
yep.
Land Down Under has been very kind to 5K, and it's always great to have another Australian working hard. Maybe someday everyone could meet together on the release of 1.0 and enjoy a good old grill on the Barbie.
Man, that would be fun. Uh, um, I can see a few people interested in the puppy as well. That is Rufus. He is the best boy. He is a corgi, but his ears don't stick up. So the most common question we get about him when we're out and about is people asking, "Is that a corgi? The Queen's dog?" Which people referencing the Queen in To Do with the Dog has gone down over time after she passed away. But I did have a few people give me their condolences for the Queen, which felt very strange. I don't know why they thought I had a personal connection to the Queen just because I had a corgi, but very sweet of them nonetheless.
So, since game design is so intangible, in your definition, what is game design? How do you go to school
Yeah.
for game design?
Yeah, that's a great question. Game design, you can go to school specifically for it, but it's pretty similar to other parts of design. If anyone has done any design learning of any kind, the way I like to think about game design, it's funny, I don't even think about it as game design in my head. It's always design. What design is at its core is solving a problem. And that made me really angry the first time I heard it. I studied graphic design first, and they introduced design to me in that phrasing. You know, design is the solution to a problem, and that was very confusing. It was like, what do you mean a problem? Like, if I want to make a game, is the problem I'm not having fun? Like, you know, what does that mean? That's so meaningless. But over the years, as I've done game design more and more, I've come to understand just how true that phrase was. Game design or design is about figuring out the best solution to a problem. And part of that process is figuring out what the problem actually is. And that's sometimes the biggest part. That's kind of a high level overall part of what design is. And then it just gets kind of more granular from there. So you figure out what the problem is, you figure out a solution that suits the problem according to, again, what the problem was and the requirements that are part of that problem. And then once you've got the solution and the direction, you start digging into that and you start figuring out, well, if I did this solution, you know, what does that mean? What happens? What information do we need to make it work? You know, what numbers would we maybe need to tune in order to make the experience feel better or make it react the way we intend it to react? So it's kind of that, that process of narrowing down the possibilities into something that makes sense for what you're trying to do. And then once you've got that, it's continuing to apply your kind of guidelines to keep it aligned with the rest of the game as you work out a lot of problems. Like, especially once you get into the second half and you're deeply into the development process, it's 100% problem solving and talking to people to solve problems. And then importantly, recording the answers. Once you've solved a problem, making sure you write it down somewhere useful so that when everybody forgets, you can actually refer to it again and remember what you decided. And that way you don't have to have the exact same conversation that you just had solving a problem multiple times over a series of months or whatever. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
So it is no, that was really detailed. That was a fantastic. I was kind of gonna hold off on questions, but John Henry Chow on YouTube had a very appropriate question for this stage of the event. What initially drew you to a career in game design, and what was your aha moment when you realized this was the path for you?
That is a great question. Green went black for a second there. That was scary. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Everyone else in whatchamacallit, in the chat, you can all hear Penn, right? If you have any issues, yep,
yeah, just call out. Thank you. I was always drawn to games. I loved them from a very early age. I didn't know originally like design was what it was going to be, but I knew I loved every part of games. I was drawn to art, to writing, to programming, to just every part of it. And so I was really indecisive. I actually didn't know what I wanted to do in games because I wanted to do all of it. And so I actually did the games course that I did because it was design, yeah, but I didn't do it originally for design. I did it because it included everything else. You know, it had some of the writing, it had some of the art, it had some of the programming, and I didn't know how to choose. So I did the course, and I feel like by the time I got to the end of it, I still didn't really understand what design was, but I knew I loved working on games still. And honestly, it's only after I was doing specifically design for a couple of years and really understood it that I learned that actually I really love this. Like, I'm so, yeah, that aha moment for me was so delayed in my career, to be honest. And I think I'm a bit unusual when it comes to that. I didn't, come into the industry being like, my dream is to, have this specific game, this design that I have to make, or anything like that. I just wanted to be in games. And then I was going to figure it out from there.
It's always better to have that aha moment sooner than later. But it's always a fantastic thing when you click and you find your divine purpose and inspiration hits you. Um, so, what does it look like? This is something I'm kind of curious, and a lot of people here who come to these events are aspiring game designers. What does it look like to take classes for game design? I don't know if you remember, there were all these terrible ads for DeVry, or like game design courses, and the way they'd sell it is that, like, oh right, be like two guys playing a video game, like, now we put the sound effect here, and this is where we put the gun. Oh man, I'm so glad I went to college for video game designs. We get to play games all day. I'm gonna figure that's not how it works in real life.
Not fully, no. To some extent, you do need to play games to research them or to analyze them, but it's less for the fun of it when you're actually studying them. So just to double check, the question was, what should you expect when you do a game design class?
Yes.
Yeah. Ideally, they should be teaching, first of all, kind of design fundamentals. So maybe if I just write some of them as we go. Game design classes.
Just to let you know,
I like to write out when I think aloud. So
no, I love this. Welcome to Penn's TED Talk.
To Penn's brain. So design fundamentals is the first part. You can also see how well I can spell. So this is kind of what I was talking about before. The thing that ideally it really is trying to get into you in design classes is learning what design is and how that applies to video games. So part of that is, you'll hear it a lot, is about the player experience. And that concept, like, one of the biggest things designers get asked to do, like part of their role in games, is to be an advocate for the player experience. And that's another thing that I feel like took me a long time to kind of figure out what that actually meant. But that's a whole other conversation. But essentially, the design fundamentals is the first thing they should be teaching you. So that might be, playing a game to analyze how it was designed. So how, but also more importantly, why it was designed that way. What are the impact of choices you're making? Those are kind of the questions that you should be asking, or it should be teaching you. And when I was mentioning before that design is the solution to a problem, this is kind of what it's starting to talk about. What's the impact? When you make changes in games, so you change a mechanic, or you add something, you remove something, it changes the game to some degree. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big. But the impact of that is what the player then experiences. So your job is to start getting good at analyzing what choices you can make, and how you can make them, and why would you make one choice over another choice? Or when you're analyzing an existing game, why did they make this choice over another choice? Every single thing in a game is there because somebody specifically put it there. And that's what the design thinking and the design fundamentals should start teaching you, is to start thinking about why these things happen. And then when you do make those choices, what is the end result? How does it change the final experience for the player? I always think about it in terms of, those English essays everyone always kind of hates, where they're like, write an essay about, what was the author trying to say? Why were his shorts blue? And then you have to write an essay about like, well, blue symbolizes sadness and whatever. And generally speaking, they feel so inane and useless. Turns out, design is actually one of the real world use cases of why that kind of thinking becomes important, is figuring out why things were made in a certain way, so that when you are trying to make a certain player experience, you can do it the other way. That's kind of the difficult thing, I feel, is just to illustrate it with very, very quick, dirty diagrams.
I like diagrams.
You have to design. Thank you. You have to design fundamentals, but it's also helpful to think of them as solutions. So it's kind of things you could do. So examples of that might be like, maybe you'll start with a problem, but like the player experience is the end result of what you do. So if I add some nice arrows, oh my god, they're huge. It becomes the player experience, but then the hard part of game design, what makes it so hard, is that when you see a final product, like when you see the Nintendo Switch, you're seeing it here. It's already finished. You are receiving the player experience of the Nintendo Switch. And so it's very easy to look back along this chain and you can analyze it. You can say, they designed a click to do X, Y, Z. They made it be social. The impact of that means that, you can share it. It's good for players. It's, you can, it's easy to tell what was good when it's already done. And it's also easy to tell what was bad when it's already done. The difficult part of game design that you learn to understand over time is when you actually have to do it backwards. Is if the player experience isn't defined yet, or isn't set because the game hasn't been made, or maybe design hasn't gone into it and you haven't defined what you want it to be, then it becomes very difficult sometimes to pick which solution. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so that's interesting. It seems very difficult to, so how does genre affect that? Like, so for example, let's say you're making a platformer game and you've got like kind of like the basics of you jump and you go into platforms and you've got jumping on platforms that float in the air, and you've got Goombas and shells. So you've got a basis of like what the player experience is based on their perceptions of the genre. From there on, how do you kind of like solve problems or start to build solutions for your unique?
So that's a great way to ask it, and I think that'll help illustrate what I'm saying a little bit better. So, do you mind just listing a couple of platformers for me? Some well-known, like there's Mario.
Mario, Jack and Daxter, Astrobot. Anyone else in the chat? Give me some platformers. Metroid. Metroid. We'll put Metroid. That counts as a platformer. People are typing furiously.
Yep.
Celeste. That's a good one.
SCP Platformer Edition.
Super Meat Boy, Castlevania, Pizza Tower. Yes, Pizza Tower is a Little Big Planet. That's a really good platformer.
True. All right, so that's probably enough for now. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna pick, let's say, Celeste, which I haven't even played yet. I know that's a travesty. And I'm also going to pick from those two, let's say, Astrobot, because I have played that one. So, if the first thing to kind of do to contextualize this a little bit is Celeste and Astrobot, obviously they're very different games. The first thing you kind of have to think about is, how are they actually different games? Like, they're both platformers. If you look at platformers on the surface, everyone kind of knows the basics of a good platformer, right? It's about movement, there's a level design, there might be some mechanics about how you move through it. You need the jump to be, jump or whatever to be really like responsive or something. And so on the surface level, it's like, well, if I described the player experience of a platformer, for example, like, the game is a platformer where you have smooth movement in an interactive world. Is that true for both games?
Yeah, I think they both have. Celeste has like really silky smooth controls, and Astrobot, I think that's an apt comparison. They're both really well known for really kind of having precise, not very floaty controls.
Exactly, which is part of sometimes where some of the problem comes in when you're trying to come up with designs is right now, this statement here is way too vague. This is a very basic, like a platformer probably needs to have smooth movement of some kind in an interactive world. But to design Celeste and not accidentally end up with Astrobot, you need to start being a bit more specific about what the player actually needs to experience when they're playing this game. So if we start trying that again for Celeste, because I haven't played it, would you mind describing to me, when you're moving around in this game, what does it feel like?
So Celeste, it feels very similar to Super Meat Boy, where it feels like you can jump on a dime, and you've got like a double jump, and you also have like these jump crystals that allow you to like after you use your double jump, you can do another triple jump, and they kind of refill your jump gauge. So jumping on Celeste kind of has like a lot of speed and momentum, but it also feels like you have a lot of midair control.
So this is really, I'm really glad we're doing this because this is helping illustrate part of the difficulty of game design sometimes in that. So uh, aside from crystal jumps, which is a mechanic, obviously that's quite themed to Celeste. If you just looked at double jump and speed and momentum, these are things that Astrobot has as well. So we have the same problem. How is Celeste different from Astrobot when we look at the movement? Have you played Astrobot, by the way?
I have. I haven't played a lot of it, but
That's
Astrobot is
fine, that's fine.
Astrobot is a very, very well made game.
Yeah. So part of what I want to look at is, so double jump and crystal jumps, these are mechanics. So mechanic, this is a mechanic. Speed and momentum, that's kind of, it's not really a mechanic, but it's kind of it's almost like it's a variable, you know. Momentum is almost not there. I almost want to split that out because
Well,
that's starting to become.
this is a really interesting question before you go deeper. What
Hmm.
differentiates from a designer standpoint a mechanic versus a variable?
Yeah. So the way I would see it is, a variable is something you can change with a number in terms of the thing stays the same, but it just does it more or less. So a double jump is kind of a mechanic, but the way you could almost break that down is jumping is a mechanic, and the variables to jumping, so variables for jumping would be how many jumps. 2 would be a double jump. It could be 3 if you had a triple jump. And you see, it's still jumping regardless of the number that you have, but then you're tuning it with how many of the thing. Does that make sense? You're
Yes.
sort of
So,
how
like,
high would be a variable.
recently I've been playing Doom: The Dark Ages. So, like,
Mhm,
each gun is kind of its own mechanic, but the upgrades are
mhm.
variables that you get with the gold. Are variables on the mechanic of how the gun interacts and stuff it does.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So with the gun, the mechanics would be things like, um, just to quickly duplicate this for a second. For gun, and get rid of some of this extra stuff. The mechanics would be things like, do you reload? Is there ammo? You might have an energy weapon or something like that. Does it have different shoot types? That's, functionality. Do you have a burst shot versus a normal shot? It's kind of like the building blocks versus the variables, of course, which is like, if ammo, how much? How big is a clip? And they're all kind of, the variables are kind of, the mechanics is like, does the feature exist at all? And then the variable is kind of the details of how that feature exists. Does that difference make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that makes it perfectly clear. But it makes it interesting in terms of like, how do you, I guess, what makes, in game design, what do you think makes a sticky problem to solve that makes people want to come back? Like, versus something that's frustrating. Like an example of like a really great sticky design is, the classic experience system in Call of Duty, where people just want to play the Call of Duty multiplayer endlessly, because it's just endless loop of reloading and shooting people. Um, how do you build like sticky problems that people want to keep solving?
So, sticky problems. So what I'm hearing is, how do you create systems that players will enjoy repeating over and over, and they'll want to stay?
Yeah, it makes you keeping wanting to play Pizza Tower, Little Big Planet, Mario. How do you
Yep.
construct a good gameplay loop? Or
Those are different questions.
oh, all right, never mind then. We will save the gameplay loop. Let's do this one first.
Yeah, just to go back for a second as well. So I've got your question here. Just to finish, what I wanted to illustrate with Celeste and Astrobot is, just when we start, the main thing for designers to really start getting good at design is to be able to differentiate between mechanics and variables and the experience, which is the bit at the end that the player has. So just to tie that up a little bit, when you experience playing Celeste, what we're talking about from the player experience is not so much how you do the things, it's how you feel when you do it. So when you play Celeste and you're jumping, as an emotion, what does that feel like? And I can start with Astrobot, if that makes it easier.
Sure, yeah, because it seems like you're more experienced with Astrobot. But I guess.
Yeah. I probably should have picked two better.
the Astrobot, like, it feels joyous. It feels very freeing.
Right.
It,
Absolutely.
it feels very buoyant and playful. It feels like
I love buoyant.
Being in a bouncy castle, if I had to describe it.
Buoyant, playful, it's energetic, freeing. That was a good one. Bouncy castle, that's a great descriptive one. Versus Celeste, where how would you describe what it feels like to play Celeste instead?
It feels very fast. It almost feels like a roller coaster, in that, like, you are riding this thing that is kind of out of control. But you have a lot of fine degree. I'm not a very precise player, so I just die a billion times and get very angry and frustrated. But it does feel like it has a high skill ceiling in terms of like how much control you have over Celeste. It just my skill threshold, it goes beyond it.
So maybe when you're playing it, you feel focused because you need to concentrate. And there might be a bit of frustration there, and you were talking about skill expressions, you might feel challenged. And this is where it starts becoming more useful as game design, because these things here at the bottom, this is what the player experiences when they play the game versus the mechanics, which is how you create those feelings. And the problem that a lot of people have in game design, or when you're learning game design, is starting to learn how to define the player experience before you've created it. Because if you don't know what you want the player experience to be, then you can do anything. You can have double jumping, you can add experience, you can add levels, you can add whatever you want. But you're going to get a random player experience back because you're not choosing solutions or mechanics that support a unified player experience because you don't know what that is. Does that make sense? So the fundamental part of game design in the end is knowing that whatever you're working on, whether it's a gun, a game mode, a sticky problem to keep players engaged, your job is to define what players need to feel, and then your job after that, after you know what they should feel, is to create that. How do you create that within the constraints that you have?
Well,
so I can jump back to the sticky problem, or if you had a different question.
Well, Raven had a really interesting question. Here's a question: what engine or language has been your favorite to use or work with? So that begs a question. Like, I know game designers aren't necessarily programmers, but do you work in Unreal, or like is it kind of like more high level concept work like this with like graphs and figurines and loops? Or do you got to get into the nitty gritty of game engines?
That's a great question. So it depends. What a game designer does is going to be different in every studio, in every position. Most game design positions will be a mix of the higher level stuff like this, which is often called paper design, or higher, conceptual design. Paper design, I think, is the most common. And this fundamentals will be part of every game design job. But then beyond that, most positions that I see do include a level of being in the engine and getting into the nitty gritty. And what level you get into the nitty gritty is, again, dependent on your studio. So some will have mixes where you're fully developing the features yourself. So you design, you decide what you're going to make and you design why, and then you'll be the one in engine developing it. And creating the functionality from scratch. Often, a common way as well is that you might be only in engine to do the variables and implementation stuff, but other people implement the mechanics and the more hardcore stuff in engine, and that'll be up to engineers or technical designers to split the roles a little bit. But some positions you do everything. As far as my favorites go, I've been, until now, this is the first project I've been professionally working in Unreal for, and I don't even have access to the engine yet because I'm fully in the paper side at the moment. I've been working in proprietary engines, and that's been mainly just like data and implementation stuff as opposed to creating functionality. So I don't really have a favorite for any of them. As far as when I've done prototypes and stuff, I've used a bunch of like the basics, like Game Maker, Unity, Unreal, and so on. Unreal is definitely my favorite. I like that it's just way more functional. Yeah, I do enjoy coding and stuff, but to me, I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to how you create the thing. Like, I don't really care between different languages because they're all fun in different ways.
Are they all fun? Every time I see computer code, I always just think like, "Oh God, get me out of here!" It's lines.
That's why you're not a coder. I am forever grateful that people are different from each other because it means that I can do things that other people would be like, "Oh no!" Like I don't want to touch the narrative, or I don't want to choose which design or whatever. So I'm happy to take those parts, so long as they'll take parts that I hate.
So, so we've got all these tools mastered. How do you create a fun gameplay loop? What separates the truly great game designs from like the licensed trash. I don't know. You seem like you're an older generation. You gave me an impressive internet reference. I'm sure you remember the early 2000s when they had like the Incredible Hulk on the Game Boy Advance, and all those
Oh,
like
it was so funny. Yep, yep.
all those like shovelware games for the PS2. Where just
Yep,
every
yep.
TV show and license would get a video game. But now those are all dead just because it costs so much to make a game. Nobody makes licensed games unless they, want to risk something.
Yep, yep, yep. I always used to be so curious about all those license games. I just would see them in the shop and I'd always be like, that must be the most fun thing ever. Like King Kong in a video game, like that must be awesome. And I remember, years and years later getting access to emulators and so on and being quite disappointed because I finally realized after playing a bunch of them that they were just straight trash. Or just,
Well,
what a so disillusioned.
I must stand in defense of Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Yes, that is the
Yep.
official title, and it is an underappreciated gem from the Xbox PS2 gen. But yes, most games with King Kong are usually trash.
Uh, all right, so building a game loop. I love talking about this. So great question. How do you make a fun game design loop? I think of it. I start thinking of it in terms of A, B, and C. And this is just a really easy way to break it down to make it a lot simpler in my own mind. So essentially, a game design loop looks like this. If we want, we can add the bottom on to make it a loop again. But right now, I don't really care about that. It's kind of implied. And again, it's just less confusing if I think about it in terms of A, B, and C. The way I like to think of it is I do X in order to achieve Y, which, or maybe actually to keep with my letters, I do A in order to achieve B, which results in C. That makes sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Just going to assume silence is a yes until I get otherwise.
Did you hear me? I said, yep.
Oh, no.
I give you an
Yep.
affirmation. My apologies
Yay.
if I didn't come through.
No, that's all good. I just need a lot of reassurance, So the important thing, first of all, to make a game loop fun is these three things need to be true. And by that, I mean a game loop will not be fun, for example, if the game loop is something like I look for, I don't know, fossils, and then sometimes it might be I give fossil, or like I unlock, I look for fossils to unlock,
Pokemon!
I don't know, a shop,
Oh, okay.
which sells hats. Right, so obviously this is a bit weird, but you can probably see the first problem here, which is very obvious. First of all, I'm starting with fossils. Then there's a shop, I guess, and then all of a sudden hats. So the first problem in designing a fun game design loop is making sure that it makes sense in terms of what does the player want to do? What is the point of the game? So if we use, for example, I don't know, Astrobot, we've been talking about that a lot. What does the player want to do in Astrobot? In Astrobot, they want to, the end goal is to reunite the robots. Because they got separated at the beginning. Your goal at the end of the loop is to reunite the robots. And to do that, you find chip pieces by exploring levels. So A, exploring levels, leads to B, which is finding ship pieces, or I should say, instead of finding ship pieces, fix the ship with parts. And as a result of fixing the ship, you reunite the robots. So this becomes fun, and it's deeper than this, of course, because obviously there's lots of loops within exploring levels. There's lots of loops within, the ship and the parts, and so it's a bit more complicated than that. But the important parts to make this fun for players is, first of all, does it make sense? uh, if, for example, you're exploring levels and then that, I don't know, if you explore levels and that unlocks more levels, but it doesn't necessarily reunite the robots, then that's not very fun because what you're doing starts feeling meaningless. Because if it doesn't contribute to the end goal, you have no reason to continue. It feels meaningless because there's no meaning to what you do. So everything in a game loop that you do has to contribute to the next item in order to feel engaged. And as part of that, you can only feel engaged if you care about the end result as well. So the key parts there is, one, there is a clear goal that the player wants to achieve. That's what C is.
So
everything's giant.
What do you think, from your personal experience as a game designer and game design philosophy, kind of like create C? Is it more like the storytelling, or is it sort of like the fun mechanic? Like, I'm going to be the very best. It's fun to collect Pokemon, so I like C. Or do you think like the story is more important? I want to collect C because I gotta save the world, or I love this character and I want to save that character. What do you think the best motivation for C is?
That's a great question, and it depends on the game. So I don't think there's a best answer because different players will want different things. So as you mentioned, for some players are maybe they like to tend and befriend. So a goal that would be interesting to them is things like find all the Pokemon, potentially, or become best friends with a dog, like Nintendogs, or something like that. So those are different goals, but then you also get players who want to be the best. They're competitive. So other goals might be competition based or social. So, things like leaderboards, rankings, things like that. There might be competition based, and part of that skill based is another similar one. So, time trials, trying to get better and better at mastering a certain thing for the satisfaction that comes from that. But the clear kind of goal at the end, or you mentioned narrative as well, and that's for a different type of player again. Those are different motivations that you can target. So when you're looking at narrative, it's a story that someone wants to see the end of. So it doesn't matter which one it is at the end. It just needs to make sense with the player experience that you're trying to create and the other goals of your project. So, for example, in King Kong, you might not want to pick a tend and befriend motivation because that might not be what your players would expect. Maybe you do want to tend and befriend and you're trying to become friends of Kong. That's maybe an angle you could go about it. But they create very different kinds of games. Did that answer the question?
Oh yeah, I absolutely. I think that gave a very holistic overview. Some of the people here are getting really inspired. So, here's a comment I really like from Commissary Henry. He says, "Tank horror game, ride tank, find SCP, identify SCP, receive crew callout, use specific ammo type, kill SCP. I'm learning, my guys."
Yeah. So the end point is the goal or C and the motivation. And making it fun on a high level is making sure that they have a clear motivation that they want to achieve. Like they need to want it, not because you told them to, but because of something else, whether it's social, is, whatever it is. You need to make sure the loop supports it so that they can actually achieve it. So that, if they want to tend and befriend, but all the gameplay is about killing things, and obviously those actions don't lead to C. And the other kind of parts as well, in terms of making loops fun. So I keep changing my which text box I'm using. So a goal players care about.
Well, here's a really interesting question from Tacit. What would you say is a game that you think failed the most in its inherent game design? For me, it would be the Golem game, LMAO. So, is there like a popular game that you've played that you feel like, from a design standpoint, did not make the loop fun or failed in its loop?
Hmm. I mean, probably yes, but sometimes when you ask a question, it's like, "What's your favorite movie?" And then your brain is like, "I've never watched a movie in my life." um, so, short answer, yes. Long answer, no further questions.
I see. It's like one of those things where it's like.
Yep.
We
I
did.
know I have some, and I know I have ones that I have plenty of beef about.
Well,
But
if you have any popular
yeah.
examples, if you want to beef on Elden Ring or I don't know, I'm just trying to think of like a popular game that like some people nitpick, or like I know in your resume you mentioned working at Ubisoft, and a lot of people like they love the Ubisoft open world formula, while other people's are like, oh my god, another map with 5 bajillion icons on it with a bunch of
Yep.
tasks I have to do. While other people are like, oh heck yeah, I'm gonna clean this map. I can't wait till I get all these icons off
Exactly.
this map.
That's an interesting one because when we look at it in terms of goals and motivations, so if you have the full map to explore, the kinds of goals behind that is, things like you get completionists is a motivation, which is, oh my gosh, spelling.
Hey,
um,
I'm not the best speller either, so no complaints here. Don't worry, the grammar police will not be coming to get you.
yep. Thank you. So, completion, I want to get 100%. And those are completely optional for the most part. You don't have to do it. It's more if you feel that drive to. So that's always an interesting one because for players who do like collecting things, you kind of have this ongoing goal, which ideally it's fun enough to do that through its own movement or, whatever the case may be, you're exploring or so and so. But it may tie into deeper motivations as well of there's the completionist, but if we look at that in terms of like the loops, sometimes it's things like one that I was an open world when I was playing recently was Rise of Ronin, where uh you're a Ronin ninja kind of samurai character going around and you can explore the map slash, find collectibles. Yeah, whatever, in order to uh synergize with the land. That's not quite the right terms. But what that does in terms of motivation at the end is become the most renowned spelling Ronin. But again, I'm so great at spelling. But just in terms of framing, like the goal is kind of become the most renowned Ronin, which you do from doing these collectibles and so on. So part of what made that fun is each time you find collectibles, it feels meaningful because it has an outcome that kind of contributes towards that overall goal at the end. Yeah. I feel like there was an original question and then I just got sidetracked. So please feel free to pull me back.
No, sidetrack is
on track.
Raven has a very interesting question. Is it possible to create gameplay loops organically in game, not set in stone, but the game mechanic creating itself based on players' interaction? And if so, how hard is it to make it fun? LOL.
That is a great question. So not set in stone, but the game mechanic creating it itself based on player interaction. It kind of depends what you mean. I'm struggling to picture it a little bit. Like, are you talking more about, say, a sandbox experience? So, for example, the whole point is to go in and just play with things? Or I can see you typing, Raven, emergent gameplay. Yeah? Sorry, I'm just waiting for Raven's answer to come in.
For the clarification.
Yeah, yep. Sandbox SCP game. Yeah, can you imagine? Chaos. Chaos.
Kind of
player choices influence in game loop. Yeah, that's a great question then. Yep. So the game mechanic creating itself based on the player interaction. The reason something like that becomes difficult is the scope expands very quickly.
Well,
so it depends on what else you're.
Well, it seems like Raven's kind of talking about like things like I don't know the Telltale games or the Mass Effect games where the loop is like the experience is largely mostly the same, but you make big story choices where you kill this guy and then that has a consequence later where some other guy comes in later in the game, or you don't take this guy on a mission and then you can't get the shield and then your thing blows up. I feel like that's what he's kind of like speaking about.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm hearing as well. The biggest problem that you get with that, and the reason why it's so hard to do, because yes, that one is difficult, is that if you're making a regular game with just a regular loop and nothing kind of changes, all within limits, the kind of workload you have is set. Like, this still might be like a heaps intense amount of work. It still might be years of development, but it's kind of set in stone. It's kind of got this linear work curve in a way. The moment you start having loops that change, it just starts becoming, you start doubling, tripling, or sometimes exponentially increasing your work. So if you think about it in terms of like, imagine a game where it's a melee game or whatever, and you can either use a sword or you can use a bow. To design a game with a sword is this. To design a game with a bow, you've literally doubled the amount of work that takes, because developing a new weapon with all of the same level of mechanics and so is literally doubling your workload. But then as soon as you start doing that with story and you have branching storylines, to account for all the different possible paths, it's, yeah.
And that's why Baldur's Gate 3 is a nightmare of design. You still there, Pen? Did I get disconnected? Hello? Can you guys hear me? Hey, can you hear me? Hello? Oh, god dang it. Hello, testing, 3, 2, 1. Let me message Pen. let me try stepping.
Bishop can hear us. Oh, something's back.
And now I can hear you. I have no idea what was happening there. My apologies. I was afraid that like we ran into some sort of Discord issue. Um,
So strange.
yeah, Discord is a weird beast of an animal. But sorry, you were going into a really articulate rant that I was really enjoying.
What was the last thing you heard?
You were talking about story branches and how complicated it was, because developing like a bow in a game with swords is like a new mechanic, and then when you do it with a story, it just creates a whole bunch of branching paths. And I was remarking about how like Baldur's Gate 3 is kind of like a nightmare, considering how many possibilities there are and all the things you can do in that game.
Exactly. Like the amount of work that takes is so much. It is so much work. And that's why a lot of games, like you mentioned, like Fallout 76 relying on players to create the story. I'm not sure what it's like in that one. I haven't played that game, but you know, in a lot of games where you do get, sometimes they try and find ways to help to integrate user created content, like user generated content to help bridge those gaps. That can help, but it's just because it's so much work. It's easy to do in concept and to concept what it would look like to have things that, you know, change with the branching storylines and stuff. But then when you get into the reality of making it, it's just very, very difficult. And that's where the difficulty comes in. Did we have any other questions?
Oh, yes. This was a question that was asked earlier, but I kind of wanted to save it for later. Tyvo asks, what drew you to the SCP-5K project in particular?
That's a great question. So part of it was originally, so I've joined on as a contractor, and when I first started, it was to design a very specific piece of work. And there were two things that was really exciting about it for me. One was I love systems. I think it's safe to say. I love how things can fit together to make bigger things, and it's very exciting to me. A lot of what my specialties are kind of in tend to be about, you know, loops and systems and this higher level, like how do things feed into each other to create a particular experience or a particular, you know, thing? How do we create a system that achieves particular goals? And I really love doing that. And the work that was being advertised was something that was very much up my alley and that I cared about. I hadn't actually played the game before joining the project. And similarly, I didn't know about the SCP universe as a wider thing. So that was also really fun because Control, which I believe is also based off SCP stuff, is one of my favorite games of all time. And I love the vibe of it. And since learning about more SCP stuff, just the idea of it is so fascinating and fun. You know, like this incredible crowdsourced and written universe of these really interesting things in these, you know, like the supernatural trying to be understood within the natural or the normal there's something just so fun and exciting about that. And I love shooter games. It's one of the genres I really enjoy. So yeah, it was kind of all those parts together that made it really exciting to work on this project.
We do have an interesting question. Well, I'm so glad it's a great way to get into the SCP universe. One of the most ambitious SCP game projects to ever hit the Steam server. But Commissary Henry asks, the Nemesis system of Middle Earth, Shadow of War, or Shadow of Mordor / Shadow of War, is it a game design system or something else?
Yeah, I'm just looking up what it is.
So I'll give the basic. It was really cool. It was basically the idea that you'd fight orcs, and then like sometimes they would get away from you, and then they'd come back. Or some of the orcs you'd kill, and he'd come back, and he'd be like, he'd have like a eye patch, and he says, "I'm gonna get you now." So you'd have like these rivalries, and it'd be kind of like this organic storytelling of having orcs betray you, having orcs become your rivals, and then you come back for them later, or they come back for you. So it kind of like built this organic. It was a really cool system, but sadly it is now lost to the world because it was copywritten, and the studio that created it is now bankrupt.
Yeah.
Support indie developers.
Game dev. RIP. It's rough out there, buddy. Yeah, it's absolutely a game design system. You can also tell just because you've called it the Nemesis system. So yeah, that's absolutely the kind of thing that I love. Is high-tech gameplay. Yeah, any kind of system is really interesting to me because of how they flow. It's what are I always think of it as kind of almost like a pipe, a set of pipes, or like pipes that'll do. Like where are the inputs, what's going into the system, and then what comes out of it. So, I guess your orcs are going into it, and then according to the choices that are made, you get different outcomes. And then the fun part of systems for me is making sure that, like, do the outcomes make sense? Do they lead into other systems? How do they interact with the core motivation? How do these different systems interact with each other in a way that's still meaningful, so that as you interact with one system, it's still contributing to C in some way. I can also see what SCP anomaly would you be interested in designing or create? That's too hard a question.
Wow.
So many fun ones.
This is I think that's a great transition to the next part of this presentation. I was hoping to do this.
That's true.
So basically, this is our sort of compromise. Penn especially cannot talk about it since we've got Trey, who's being such a gracious guest here. But Trey has put in a device with Captain Crunch. If I should give away any secrets, then my bird will be forcibly conscripted into the D-class program, which I do not think he will survive.
No.
I don't think he would like the hoodie. Captain Crunch would not like that. But in lieu of that, until Penn can show the glorious thing that she is working on, we were going to engage in a fun communal design exercise. So tonight's design is to... how do we bring the Infinite IKEA SCP-3008 into a playable design? This does not mean that the Infinite IKEA is going to be an SCP-5K. This is purely a practical game design exercise to showcase how Penn works through a problem and designs an SCP. But, maybe one of you will love this so much you'll be like, who's that gentleman who loves Bananazilla and wants to bring Bananazilla? Why am I blanking it? DCR, yes. Bananazilla's strongest warrior. So who knows? Maybe if you like this idea and you keep on coming to every single event and memeing it into oblivion, maybe the Infinite IKEA will make it in. I'm not making any promises. I cannot commit to anything. But, so... I introduced you to the Infinite IKEA earlier. How do you approach the Infinite IKEA in making a game design for the Infinite IKEA for 5K or just in general?
Well, the first thing, like we've kind of gone over before, is what's the intention? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And so the first thing that actually comes with designing something is, oh my gosh, everything is so big. Why are we doing this? That's the first thing before we can design anything. And so the answer might be, we want a new game mode. But that's not quite enough yet. We want a new game mode, but kind of why do we want a new game mode? What's the point? One easy point might be in order to introduce a new gameplay outside of a campaign. All right, so that's kind of, maybe that's our goal. That starts to be a bit more helpful because we know, all right, if that's true, then it means we don't want to be creating a campaign. So, what would that look like? How would we want this to be fun?
Well,
we might want to...
We have some suggestions here. Gooms, our community manager, says, problem in trying to solve. I brought a dresser here, and the package is missing a screw. So that's one motivation.
So that could be interesting, yeah.
Cal and stuff suggests
for player motivation.
Cal suggests eat the dresser, and then Eleanor, another Afraid team member, asks trap players to maximize playtime. So,
all right. So why maximize play time from trapped players? Motivation. What was it? Someone said. They said, find the missing screw. Yep. That's quite interesting. If we just do a brainstorm for everyone who's around, if you think of the infinite IKEA and you think about it in a game, what comes to mind? Any idea?
All right, everyone,
like it could
come
be
on.
Mechanics, it could be weapons, it could be modes.
Just spit it out here. What ideas come from the infinite IKEA? Just throw them out there. Let's get them. I want to hear everything. I want to hear from everything from meatballs to little kids' furnishings to the fact that you can't get out of there. So I'm hearing survival game mode, crafting, infinite bacon.
Bacon, that's a good one. Survival. That makes sense. Crafting. Unpronounceable names. Oh, that's an interesting one.
Building.
So I almost call that IKEA-isms.
Meatballs.
Names, mechanics. Guess we got food. Love them. The meatless meatballs. Oh my gosh, I have some stories about them. Meatballs. They have hot dogs. They have the automated cafeteria thing. Employees, yep. So, in the infinite IKEA, I guess, yeah, employees is also the quote unquote the staff. Extraction shooter. So mode.
Why are meatballs get out?
Shooter.
There you go. The Infinite IKEA in 5K is an expansion where you play as the GOC, the UIU, or the Foundation. You got to get in the Infinite IKEA and extract the meatballs and get out. Every man for themselves.
PvP, everyone themselves. Anything on the other chat? So good. Base building.
There was survival. You seemed to like the survival.
Yep.
You people in the YouTube chat. I know you were a little bit, not quite as strong as the Discord, but I'd love to see you. There's supposedly experience points you get now. You can't do anything with them, but it makes you feel better if you chat more. But yes, if you want to contribute to the Infinite IKEA experience, please type in there.
I like that a lot already. So that's some good stuff to start with. So the next part that kind of happens is we start having some of our goalposts in that, we want a new game mode. It's not a campaign. We want to maximize time for trapped players. What the next kind of parts we need to do is we need to start filtering ideas because we have lots of ideas. Like, you could do crafting, you could do base building, you could do extraction shooter, PvP. So the next problem is you start getting the question of which one do you pick?
So this is a really interesting point, and bringing my social media expertise, a big thing that most of the big YouTubers talk about is ideation. How do you come up with 100 ideas, and how do you filter it down to the 10 best, and then you filter down the 10 best to the one video, and that is your video that will make you 100,000 views, the thing that you want to click on, and that is the most important thing if you want to be Mr. Beast. You have to idealize, and that's why you need to pay me $2,000 for my class. But ideas are very subjective, so in the game design process, how do you cut the wheat from the chaff? How do you decide what's a good idea and what's a bad idea? How could we ever say infinite bacon is not, is better than base building?
Yep. So it comes from two kind of processes in my mind. The first is developing really clear goals. So we don't really have clear goals at the moment. So between like infinite bacon and base building, it might be that if the campaign is really serious, maybe a goal that as a team we decide upon is something like, you know, we want something light-hearted as a breath of fresh air. So that starts giving us direction, that maybe some of the more serious ideas aren't the ones that we're going to go with. But how we kind of come up with some of these goals and, as you say, cut the wheat from the chaff is, but here's a diagram I prepared earlier.
Ooh.
I see it as just, idea filtering. And I kind of picture it like a coffee filter of some kind, or like a processing thing where you have all your raw ideas at the beginning, all the how abouts, we could do, what if, infinite bacon, base builder, so on. And then you filter all of the ideas through different sets of requirements. So it becomes a bit of a process of elimination because you don't know what a good idea is or a bad idea if you don't know what good or bad is. You actually have to define that first of like, infinite meatballs is a great idea unless we're making a game where, I don't know, there's no food in the universe for some reason. So does that make sense in a story where, again, there's no food in the universe or meatballs don't exist?
Well,
so some of the filters...
Here's like a really interesting philosophical thing. One of the things that makes game design difficult is that you can't really see the forest for the trees until all the elements are there. And you hear stories like about like famously
that's like over here.
Exactly, the player experience that like Halo 2 sucked or Half-Life sucked, and it wasn't until they had this big moment where they put everything together and scrummaged together, and then or the BioWare magic where everything just comes together at the last minute. How can you tell when you don't have like a playable version if a game design idea is bad or not working? How do you like filter out the good ideas from the bad ideas, or how do you know an idea is bad when you don't have a playable demo and you haven't built it yet?
So if you absolutely can't test any of it, so you can't test a feature in isolation in any way, then you can still do a lot of filtering in advance through just different questions in a way. So the basic ones that you kind of are thinking of, and they would be thinking of in like Halo and things like that, is you start asking like, is it similar to what you've done? Does it suit your brand or game? Does it meet the feature goals, which is what we were defining before? It sounds like some of the ones that maybe they were missing are things like, is it something our players would enjoy? Or, for some games and titles, in order to test it, you can do market research and surveys and things like that. You can get your player base and be like, would you be interested in a feature that does X, Y, Z, as an example? And you can try your best to research what your target audience is interested in. You can refer to other games that your target audience plays and sees what's popular within those in order to find inspiration. In order to know if a game design kind of sucks or not, when you're making it, once you've already kind of committed to ideas, is making a version that you can play test as early as possible. So the scrappiest version of it to kind of demonstrate the idea. And that becomes more of a process question of how can you plan to make not a final version, just can you plan to make a version that demonstrates the idea before you ship it, before you fully commit to all of the engineering resources? And can you demonstrate that the idea is worth doing in this prototype? You do need enough time and resources to kind of do that. But if you can successfully do that, that's the kind of thing that would really save the time there. And if it's not, fun and meeting the question, the problems and so, then you still have time to pivot into something that would maybe be better. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, but it's still interesting because it is like an unspoken art. Because like, are you a fan of The Simpsons by any chance, Penn?
Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to watch it growing up, and there's too much of it now for me to try and get into it.
Well, so I bring it up because most of the Simpsons now isn't that great, but there's like the first 8 seasons are considered to be cartoon classics. I'm sure you see them in memes all over the internet. There's this really famous episode about the Itchy and Scratchy. And the whole idea is that they want to revamp the show and try and find a new direction. And it's like a whole parody about this Hollywood system of focus testing. So they have this scene where like they have a bunch of kids watching the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, and then the tester is like completely confused. So you think it's fine. So you want it to be them to be relatable, but you also want them to go on far out adventures where they go fight dragons and robots. But you also want them to go to school and have problems that you deal with in every day. And then the studio executive behind the one way glass starts screaming, saying, "You kids don't know what you want." So how do you distill? Is it just instinct? Is it good design thing? How do you give the players what they want but they don't need? Because from a conventional standpoint, you'd think that nobody would want a Souls game. Who wants to play a game where these impossible monsters just kill me again and again and again, and I just got to dodge really good? But people love those games.
Yeah, I think what's in that scenario when the kids are saying, what were a couple of the examples that you gave? Like, they want them to.
They want to be relatable, but they also want to go fly rockets and fight robots and do all these other things. Where basically the players want contradictory things. They want Call of Duty, but they also want it to be futuristic. But they also want it to be grounded and realistic, but they also want zombies, the zombies mode.
So what do you do if you get conflicting feedback? That is a great question. So this comes up a lot, and in playtesting it can come up a lot. Like I've spoken to designers who've, they've done a prototype, they've been playtesting it, and they've gotten really confused because some players, when they play a level, will say things like, this is too easy, I need more of a challenge. And other players are saying things like, this is really confusing, I didn't know what to do, I want to make it easier. So on one hand, you have some players saying make it easier, and on the other hand, you have players saying make it harder. So it starts getting a little bit more complicated when you start getting that. And to me, a couple of things jump to mind and how you try and fix this problem. The first is identifying your target audience. So, for example, in a Souls-like game, your target audience are people that are looking for challenge, right? And they're willing they really want to get skillful at the game and dodging at the right time. So when you're asking players for feedback, if that's your target audience, then you probably want to make sure that more of the people that you're getting feedback from are people that you actually want to play your game. Like, your game isn't always for everyone, and that's okay, because different people, as we said, want different things. So if we're identifying a particular audience for our game, we need to understand, what does that audience want, which is kind of what we were talking about up here, in what is the clear goal they want to achieve? What will that feel like? So what does our audience want? How do they want to feel? And so when you start getting conflicting advice, sometimes it's being clearer about, one player saying this is too easy. Are they our target audience? If so, maybe that's the feedback that we need to listen a bit more closely to, versus the players who are getting too frustrated easier. On that case, sometimes is the feature being, where is the problem happening? Is it actually the mechanic /level /whatever? Or is it a bug or communication issue? So sometimes it's identifying who your main audience is, because that way you can clarify what they want and what they should be feeling. And then that way you know which feedback is kind of the ones you're targeting. If it's conflicting, sometimes you want to check the feedback that you're getting that, is one player actually experiencing a bug? And that's why they're giving such different feedback, whereas the other player isn't encountering that. Like, is there something else missing that's preventing them from having this experience that they would be having otherwise? What else can you do? Sometimes in those questions, like, want to be relatable versus robots, is digging into the ask behind the statement. So, for example, want to be relatable. If you break that down, like, why do they want it to be relatable? And it might be, if it's a kid saying they want it to be relatable and stuff, it might be they want to be emotionally connected. They might be asking to feel, they don't want to feel lonely. They want to feel, like they have a friend. And if that's kind of the motivation, that's when you start comparing it to your core pillars as well, about like, is this what our show is? Is this the motivation that they're meant to have? Is this related to our project, or is there a different problem there? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so I guess how do we apply those to the infinite IKEA to start filtering out bad ideas from the good ideas? I guess
Yeah.
are we trying to tailor this to the 5K audience, or do we trying to tailor it to a broader audience? How do we apply these
Yeah, that's
lessons
perfect.
to our current project?
So that's a great question. And I also want to say that there aren't any bad ideas. There's just ideas that aren't a fit for this project. And something in the creative process, especially when you're brainstorming and stuff, is if people feel like they're being judged for ideas that they're going to give, then it means people are less likely to step forward and be comfortable giving ideas and brainstorming, which means that you're starting to stifle creativity. So it's always important to just be careful with our language sometimes and be like, yeah, it's not that they're bad ideas, it's just they don't suit the goals that we have. So that was a great idea as well, in terms of maybe if I start making some more clearer goals as well, it's, we want a game that appeals to players, or specifically SCP 5K players, existing players. And that starts narrowing down which mechanics and stuff would be better for our game. So in this example here, what I would probably do if I was starting to look at all of this is I would see if I could talk to someone like yourself, if we have a community contact person, to maybe do some feedback polls, like to our player base. So are you able to run a poll now?
Yes, we can. So what poll would you
Yeah.
like?
Can you see if people who currently play SCP are they most interested in a survival game, extraction shooter, PvP, everyone for themselves?
PvP. What
I
else?
think those are the only
All right.
game
So
modes.
survival, extraction,
And
PvP.
maybe add base building.
Okay. Base.
I guess that's part of survival, but
Well, would you want to do base building / survival, or
Yeah, that probably makes most sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see. What mode do you want the infinite IKEA to have? So that is posted up in the Discord. Vote, all 17, 16 of you, and I will also post it up on YouTube.
See some other weapon ideas there. So someone mentioned a hot dog gun before, I think. Hot dog gun. Someone mentioned makeshift railgun. I feel like you could probably do some really funny, like, you hit them with a lamp like a standing lamp that you pick up and whack people with. So, or like a chair, like wrestling style, just an IKEA chair that you just pick up and wallop someone. Day-night cycle. That's true. In this one, the Infinite IKEA, that's probably quite important.
We got 7 votes so far. It is neck to neck. Survival base building has 3, and extraction is 3. 4, survival base building is up by 5 votes. It is 56% of it. What else? Who else is going to avoid? Gooms is going for Fortnite Battle Royale. Fortnite Battle Royale. How could we have forgotten Battle Royale? But so far, it seems like survival base building is the winner. On YouTube, it is getting 100% of the votes. Vote for you on YouTube.
Love that.
Vote. Do you want base building or other stuff?
Water, medical supplies. Great.
But it seems that, survival base building is the winner.
I love that. I really love that because I feel like, if I start thinking about some of my other filters about, does it suit the brand IP game? SCP 5K is very tactical a lot of the time, so you have to make strategic choices, and survival and base building kind of matches that. The IP game, we've already picked an SCP thing, but it really matches survival and base building, really matches the concept of the Infinite IKEA, right? The people kind of making these towns on the inside and living in there, and that really lines up really nicely from the higher level. At the same time, people started talking about the day-night cycle. That obviously that's a very strong staple in most survival games, which perfectly works in with the current law of the Infinite IKEA, with the staff who, run around and they're like, the store is closed in the PM. So that's works really well. So just to tie that up, let's put a gold star on survival base building, or maybe actually let's give it a what's it called? Trophy.
Yeah, trophy.
Survival base building 1. Woo!
1 second. I'm just gonna get some water for myself, but I guess the next step is, now that we have a little bit of a parameter, how do we cull all these brilliant ideas of infinite meatballs and other things?
So they start, because we have a pretty limited amount of ideas here still, so that's fine. We don't fully need to cull them yet. The next thing that I think would be important is start identifying what would we need in a survival and base building game. Like, or even just copying out the ones that are very obviously part of the survival genre. So if I add a little star to the ideas that feel like they fit in really well with the idea of a survival and base building game, we start getting some things that naturally start to stand out. So crafting, is quite common in those. Obviously, base building, we gotta get rid of that. And building is sort of the same. Building slash. I guess they would be considered separate things, but that's okay.
All right, I
building
return.
And base building.
Interesting.
Welcome back.
Interesting question from Fox Easy. An Infinite IKEA game would be cool, but how do we not have the challenge of the game get boring? There's only really one enemy type, being the employees at night, which could get boring real quick.
So, how to not make the challenge boring with one enemy? That's a great question. And that's absolutely a challenge that you're going to get here. So I think that's really interesting because it starts raising maybe some other design parameters that we should be thinking about. So if we only have one enemy, that means maybe if the enemy is horde-like, that's probably not as fun. Because you'll just be mowing down a million of the exact same that never changes. And yeah, that's probably not a very enjoyable experience in the longer term. Some of the other things that kind of come to mind is, maybe taking reference from maybe taking reference to other games that don't rely on hordes of enemy, like Slenderman or Alien Isolation, might be another way to examine it. Because that way, even if there's only one creature type, it can be interesting. It can be infinitely interesting all on its own. Even Minecraft with the creepers. What are the green guys?
Oh yeah, the creepers, the ones that explode, right?
Yeah. That's an interesting reference as well because there aren't too many of them, right? Generally speaking, especially in early game, when they start appearing, they're kind of sparse. It's kind of everything's fine until it's not, and you kind of have to get down and hide. And it's not so much strong, super fast combat. It's more about how you kind of react to it. And so it's true that in the end, there's still only a certain amount of time that it could be fun for. Like any game, every game is going to have a natural lifespan. But by trying to keep that in mind early as a design consideration, you can you can choose ideas that help support. You can choose ideas that maybe, for example, they don't rely on killing a million enemies, and we start looking at mechanics and so on that are more interesting with fewer enemy types, and what does that look like? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that was a very good overview.
Yay! That does raise another thing as well, in that in a Infinite IKEA, if we're survivaling and base building, right now in SCP 5K, we don't do a lot of that. We don't really have a lot of functionality that's not around shooting or interacting with basic objects. So that starts becoming another kind of design consideration, that when we're filtering our ideas and developing them further into what they look like in our game, it'd be how to not rebuild an entire other game.
Well, it could be
So,
like more simplified crafting, where like you get items, and then you get like kind of like a preset structure you can build, versus like, Minecraft, where you build each single block.
Exactly. So yeah, you try and find those in between points. So maybe you collect resources, and then you interact with specific base with a capital B. It's your base. It's not necessarily everywhere, but you have your specific base to upgrade it or whatever. And not building blocks literally everywhere. And simplified crafting. Or maybe we can use the crafting bench.
People love crafting benches.
Or the upgrade bench, whatever it's called. Like maybe there's something there we can use as well to unify some of that functionality. And so this is helping as well. We're starting to narrow it down, in that, maybe it's not, again, like Minecraft, where you can place things literally everywhere. Maybe we start focusing on specific mechanics, like doorways. Like maybe any doorway you can cut off. Any doorway you can barricade. Another interesting question is kind of destructibles. Like a question I would have for the team is, From a technical point of view, can we destroy furniture for collecting resources? You know, like what would that look like in our game? Is it possible? Would Albie just pick up his computer, fly to Melbourne, and throw it at me? You know,
That's right.
exactly. Like some
You're
of those,
you are
yeah.
you are on the same continent. I can imagine Al Barney, like, just bursting down your
He
door.
exactly. Like if I do something to offend you, like I'll still be sad. I don't want to do it, but I'm not going to be as afraid for my life as if I did something to really piss off Albie.
Oh God, I get to see him, dual wielding bird eating spiders, just ready to throw them at your
Exactly.
dog. He's got like a Tasmanian tiger on a leash, just like, no, we're not going to have destructible objects.
Exactly. So this question and the answer to that question would actually impact a lot of these ideas as well. It starts helping us naturally narrow down some of the ideas that we can't do so that we can focus more on the things that we can. Another question that should also become one of our kind of goals and added to, the guidelines up here starts being, what is the reason or what is the player motivation while in the infinite IKEA? So they're surviving. Why? Like, this is where you need to start, like, maybe thinking a little bit about the narrative and stuff, because that also plays into which mechanics you might choose to create that unified experience. You know, are we living in one of the little towns? Are we D-class? Are we the D-class unit that got sent in to investigate? And that kind of informs the motivations. Like if you're living in a little town, are you trying to connect towns to, for kind of social reasons? If we're D-class, it might just literally be straight up survival / escape. And this kind of gives the motivation to the player as well of they need to know why they're building and base building if it's not just if the goal isn't to just kill enemies and rack up points. It starts becoming, what's the day-to-day stuff is the, collecting resources and building or whatever, but they still need that overall goal. So do we have any ideas from chat? Like what would the
All right, chat. What do you think the end goal is? Is it just you survive infinitely and then you get points? Should this game mode have an end? Should you fight an Ender Dragon? Should you fight an IKEA Dragon? Is that the whole point? Like how Minecraft has an end where you get all the portals and then you fight the Ender Dragon. What is the ultimate goal? What do you want to see? I want to hear some brainstorms. I want to see some clicking and clacking in that chat. What should be the end goal of the infinite IKEA? Or, as Goom says, maybe you just get as many Swedish meatballs. Can you hear me? Commissary Henry was saying, I hope Discord's not having an issue again. Gooms can still hear us both. So maybe it's just someone else has a commissary Henry. I'm not sure if I can help you. But anyway, I'll type it in. What should be the end goal of the infinite IKEA? Should you survive for as long as possible? Should you collect meatballs? Should there be an endpoint? What do you want to be the end of this game? That is Captain Crunch. He thinks that it should just go on forever, and you should just play the game into infinite, as he is yelling. I don't know if you can hear him, but he's being very chatty.
Someone mentioned, where was it?
No, we are not getting 3008. This is a fun practical exercise to illustrate what 3006. I'm sorry, man. But if you have an idea, what do you want 3006 endgame to be? I'm hearing raid map. I'm hearing secondary GOC base of operations.
One of the ideas we've got there quite like is this one. So the UIE operatives are sent to investigate, only to find themselves inadvertently transported into entering the building site. So this is a really fun one because you both have a reason for being, maybe you have a gun or something to start off with. You want to escape, but there's also a good motivation for you to want to find other people in there. So if I start thinking about, this idea, so the main goal is to escape. Along the way, what can help you do that is connecting with other communities, potentially, as part of the survival, or finding other survivors, finding information, and directions. And then, of course, pure survival. Food/water/health. Okay, and this starts helping narrow it down. Like if we follow this thread, it starts getting a little bit easier to maybe picture how it could play out. So if I follow that, and the main goal is to escape, and we're, finding stuff along the way, it's going to go sideways. And I'll pull one of these just to make sure we've got an overall loop that's kind of building. So results in escape. So I want to explore and map my surroundings in order to gain resources to survive, as well as gain location information, which in the end means you can escape. And this is helpful. This is starting to narrow it down even further. So if we start looking at our mechanics again and what might be useful, we can see that if we have more information, we can start marking out other ideas that may also really hit into this. So, for example, if we're exploring and gaining resources and we know, like, yes, we definitely need the food and all of that, then yeah, meatballs, hot dogs. In a way, infinite bacon as well, because in the SCP lore, the cafeterias refill each time. So that starts becoming yet another consideration for us to think about. So in a survival game with kitchens, with infinite food, how do we consider food as a resource?
Well, interesting. Ipswich just had like a big contribution. He says for 3009, has anyone suggested invisible portals, i.e., you have three portals that all look identical and visually all lead to the same one hallway, but 2/3 have invisible portals that will shift you elsewhere in the 3009 interior, as well as a randomized factor to make sure that they aren't always the same. So, what do you think about this invisible portal thing?
I think that's really interesting. So, invisible portals that, let's see, yeah, free paths that all look identical and visually all lead to the same one, but you have two that shift you elsewhere. So, the interesting thing about when I was reading about the law of the infinite IKEA, was they did describe the original infinite rules. That makes it sound like the most boring thing ever. But when it was talking about how the spatial stuff worked, it was looked like a normal IKEA went on infinitely in a certain direction, but also the infinite sections were persistent. So if you went into a room and then left a room you kept exploring and then you came back, the rooms were going to be the same. And so having portals that randomize your location start becoming counter to at least my current understanding of the SCP 3008 law. Unless when you went into those portals, it would take you back to where you were. But when it's infinite, it kind of doesn't matter, if that makes sense. Like, if everything around you is randomized, then it doesn't matter if you go through a portal that sends you to another randomized area, because everything there is going to be randomized in the same way that it's randomized around you. There's no real reason to do that. So, however, I do think it would be interesting to have it be, however it was, if you start here at this rectangle, then you could potentially have a random seed. So everything around you, all the rooms, they're completely randomized and different according to a seed. And then that would be really interesting in terms of longer term gameplay. If you start a new game, it might be, that's a choice you have to make as well. I think to make it possible, you would need to use room randomization in some way. But another design question becomes, do we lean into a bespoke encounter / story, or keep it more random? It's like, do you have more, and maybe there's middle grounds as well, where maybe you have hubs that you can find, and those are handcrafted areas versus randomized areas. But it just adds another question that you have to put through the filters according to your requirements and your scope and your team and the IP and so on, and the goals that you have in order to start making more of those decisions. So in this scenario, I'd probably lean to something more random, because we're trying to stay away from something like a campaign. So we would lean more into randomization instead of maybe having a bespoke story if you reach certain areas. It might be that if we think about the randomization, the goal of the game, or the game mode, that as a game mode, you start in a random spot. Your goal is to, get out / survive. The IKEA is randomized according to a seed. See how long it takes. And then you can try again with different seeds. Like, because the environment would change each time, there's potentially some room for interesting replayability there of how long does it take you to build up your base and then escape. Maybe with different seeds, it can encourage different challenges if you have access to certain resources and not others. There might be other things to get you could do to make replayability more of a thing. For example, like any social features that might lean into it. Maybe playing with friends. Maybe to be really interesting, actually, a really interesting asymmetrical game mode where other players are the staff. What if it's you trying to survive versus 3 of your friends who are trying to find ways to break down your barricades in the survival mode? So things like that can be really fun to think about as well. Full stop.
Well, we are getting a little bit towards the limit. Thank you so much for gracing us with this time. I do know that you have a regular full day, so we're gonna wrap it up in like say 5-10 minutes. Um, so I guess we've had a lot of great ideas. We've got a lot of prototyping. I'm the evil big game studio, and I say, all right, give me you got to finish it up. You got to submit this to the game I'm your teacher. I'm Professor McGonagall at Harry Potter's Game Design University.
This is due tomorrow.
This is due tomorrow. It's 2 and 5 minutes. How do you finish this into like a semi-completed project within 5 minutes?
So I think this would be. I mean, I can't make the game in 5 minutes, but this would probably be you start in random spot. Your goal is to get out, survive. Randomized. You can try different seeds. I'm gonna say there is a day/night cycle. Staff attack you at night. You need to find and build up a shelter from preset civil bases. So you find a base location, you build it up using resources. The shelter gets destroyed overnight. You need to keep moving to find new shelter resources. So that way, you can't stay in the same spot forever because you won't have resources in order to build up your shelter. So you got to keep moving. You got to find food and water in the meantime. Let's find supplies. Yep. And according to a seed, random rooms with supplies or other stuff. That's my game pitch.
All right. You know what? Let's do a customer research. Let's do a poll. Based on this pitch from Penn, would you buy the 300 DLC? Would you buy 300 DLC? Yes? No? All right. Vote on it. What do you think? Is this?
I can vote.
Are you sold? Are you not sold? Do you like this idea? So far it's 83%. They want Al Barney's nightmare to come true.
Sorry, Al Barney.
Oh, he's gonna be furious. 6 votes. It's going up. People are voting. They want this hard to build mode with features that aren't in 5K yet to become a reality. You have just won it. You have won the Shark Tank of game design.
Yes. Gonna say
Congrats.
if people didn't vote for it, I would just keep adding meatballs until everyone was in. That's my true game design secret. Yeah,
it,
sometimes you just need to beef it up a bit, you know?
it would be just like those Bethesda games where like people hoard things and then they just spawn them infinitely in like Skyrim or Starfield. It's like a hundred
Like, I'm gonna
thousand
fill this room.
pretzels. Only it would be meatballs and they just roll everywhere. We did have a few other thoughts that I think would be good through before we wrap things up. Ipswich asks, are there any cognito hazards inside 3008, i.e. hallucinations, auditory tricks, replacing player models temporarily with enemy placeholders? I'm not too familiar with 300's capabilities, so it seems like he wants. Could you fit some Eternal Darkness hazards in this game mode?
I think that'd be interesting. I would have to read more about it. I think it would just depend if it made sense with 3008 and the other, if there were any other of the things that could collaborate within it. That could be fun. But yeah, to be determined.
Um, and then Commissary Henry asks, could we rescue trapped civilians, including Foundation personnel who went rogue or were abandoned, retrieve critical Foundation data intel that was lost inside, or find a way to stabilize/contain the anomaly from within? Potential forward operating base. Do any of those sound like interesting possibilities?
I do think that those are really good ones because it helps support. It's in the same direction. You know, if you're doing this here, then that gives you another reason to kind of leave the defensive area or keep moving forward. You know, if you need to find people with keys or something, or stabilize anomalies to move forward. Yeah, it makes the exploration more interesting and gives it a bit more direction. So those are great additional ideas.
Those are definitely fun ideas that could help expand it and make it feel even deeper. All right, we got like 2-3 minutes left. People, give us any questions you have about game design. Speed blitz it. Please give us more questions. These are your final things. We're not going to be able to have Penn Murphy here too much longer. I do not have the ability to pry her like I do have some other people, so this time is very valuable. We hopefully will have her again once the secret of what she's been building has been revealed, and then she can talk about it in great detail. I cannot wait for that to show you what she's working out on, but I cannot tell you. Gooms asks, favorite non-video game?
Favorite non-video game? The first one that came to mind is the Spoon game. If you've ever played it, it's a fun party game that you can play where you get 2 people, and those 2 people are blindfolded and they both have a wooden spoon or a spatula or something like that. And the goal is they have to, while moving slowly, they're not swinging, they have to try and tap the other person with their implement. But they're blindfolded, so they kind of rely on everybody else to kind of shout and yell and tell them where to go and what to do, which is generally just really fun. Very silly.
I don't think I've ever seen the Spoon game. That sounds really fun.
Another game recently that I've been loving a lot has been a board game called Galaxy Trucker, which is sort of like a roguelike shipbuilding game where you and your friends try and build a ship under some time pressure, and it's really fun. And then you go on a randomized kind of adventure and see who survives and who makes the most money. It's very fun.
Just to add to that,
Strongly recommended.
One of my favorite game designs is the Apples to Apples. I always thought that was an ingenious game. And one of my great annoyances is I went to college with one of the guys who created Cards Against Humanity. So I was always annoyed to see him like basically pilfer the Apples to Apples design and like become a millionaire from it. I always get annoyed when I see Cards
Yep,
Against
yep,
Humanity and like Barnes and Nobles and everywhere else.
yep, man. Sometimes just the right marketing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The right
Right time, right marketing, right place, right time, all of that. It's hilarious.
All right, it is time to wrap up. It has been a pleasure to have you. I'm so glad we got to do this. Um, just to let you know, our next community event is this Saturday. We are having a movie night, a super summer sequel where we were going to watch two super action packed movies. I will reveal them since they will be Terminator 2 and Aliens. We're going to watch Terminator 2 and Aliens. Uh oh, Gooms has another question.
Those are
Yes,
good movie picks.
we are gonna because it's summer. We're gonna watch some sequels. We're gonna watch some sequels with some of the best monsters of all time. Um, and we are going to watch those on Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern. So I hope as many of you can make it there. A few more questions. What is the average time it takes to draft a storyboard for a game?
Completely depends based on how big the game is and how much it relies on storyboards. So, how many cutscenes do you plan to have? A game like SCP 5K might be quite easy because there aren't. I don't know if there are that many cutscenes or anything like that. So, in that instance, it might be free, instant, versus a game like Stray Gods, which is almost entirely cutscenes and dialogue, which
Commissary
would take months and months and months.
Commissary Henry asks, what advice would you give to aspiring game designers looking to break into the industry?
Uh, I would see if you can get connected with your local game design community, either through like meetups or even LinkedIn, trying to find designers that you um, like the look of and like the look of their career and so on, and try talking to them. I don't know what your game design experience is already, but talking to people who are already there is always a great way to start to find out how they did it, what advice is relevant for your area, because that's going to change place to place as well. So talk to people, meet some people, see what ideas they have, or maybe they have any opportunities you don't know of.
Good advice.
The programmers ever get thought of at all when brainstorming designs like this is probably too difficult to implement from a code standpoint? Absolutely yes. So brainstorming, I encourage put whatever in. Don't limit it yet, because again, I want to encourage creativity early. But it's when we go through the filters, one of the filters we absolutely need to be considering and talking to the team about is what's the technical feasibility. You should never ever pick something that's going to make your programmer riot or quit, because otherwise you won't be able to make the game without them, right? They need to be on board.
And probably the most important question of the day. In a hypothetical SCP-5K movie, who would you cast as SCP-173-B, aka the Statue, The Rock, Jack Black, Chris Pratt, or Steve Buscemi?
Wait. What's the SCP number again? What do I need to know about the SCP before I pick?
173, it's the statue in the game. It's the one that snaps people's necks.
Oh! Geez. Of those choices, I would go for Rock.
Well, you know.
Or Steve Buscemi.
All right, two good choices. Two good choices. All right, we are at the 2 hour mark. Any final thoughts before we bid these people a wonderful adieu and then leave you to do your fine work?
I just want to say thank you, everyone. This was really fun. I'm excited that some of you had some questions about game design and stuff, and I hope you got something out of this.
So there you go. I hope you found this
lovely to meet you too.
And I hope you enjoyed this opportunity to peel behind the veil of what it takes to build the games that you love to play. As always, it's a pleasure to introduce new people. I love hosting these sessions, and I hope I see many of you Saturday to enjoy the movie night. And trust me, we want to. There's nothing more than I want to do than send you teasers for 0.17. they're working really hard. They're churning the midnight oil, but you know, they got to make sure that it's playable and all the features are working. And then once that's we have a timeline of when we can get it to you. That's when we're going to start rolling out teasers. I can't say much more than that, but just that like, we want to tell you stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff. Penn is bursting at the seams, wanting to tell you stuff. But trust me, we are planning it, and we can't wait to start letting you know what we got cooking in the kitchen.